Oh boy, look at that title. That is some serious bait. How could I possibly justify that Ashen is better than the game that it draws so much inspiration from? 2 words, my friend. Zero decks. Ashen has no katanas, and therefore it is the best Souls game by default. Don't even think about adding me, nerds. Today, I'm going to be talking about Ashen. I'm surprised that I really haven't heard anything about this game. It seems like it's been flying under the radar since it launched, which is a real shame because it's an absolutely fantastic game. I'd even go as far as to say that I think it's the best game I've played in a few years. I went into Ashen with no expectations. I knew nothing about this game, but within a few hours of playtime, I was completely hooked on it. This game drew me in with its atmosphere and story, and it never let go. From start to finish, this game had me wanting to find out what was next. When you press circle, you do a roll.
This game is literally Dark Souls!
I'm joking obviously, but this game does have a control scheme that is nearly identical to Dark Souls. It's so close in fact that I didn't really have to adjust at all going into it. The control felt natural from the moment I started, almost like I had played the game before. The only major deviations from the Souls control scheme were in the jumping and dodging. Jumping and climbing in Ashen are mapped to the triangle button. Both of these things function exactly as expected and feel very intuitive, most of the time. The climbing does occasionally act up, and the assisted climbing mechanic can be odd sometimes. There's no fucking... What? Why? But it's never a serious issue, and it almost always works as expected. The second major change is in the ability to quickstep or roll on command. When you're locked onto an enemy, tapping the dodge button will perform a quickstep, which is fast and seems to have a few iframes in it. But if you instead double tap the dodge button, you will do a roll which is slower and has notably more iframes. This small twist on the classic Dark Souls control scheme is actually really interesting, and I think it adds a little bit more depth to the combat. On the whole, I found the controls for Ashen to be very intuitive and natural. I never had any moments where I felt like I was getting killed because of clunky controls or janky movement. In fact, my only problem I had with controls was that my controller kept getting unplugged because of these awful USB connectors. Alright, you saucy cunt. Prepare yourself. Equipment in Ashen also follows the mold of Dark Souls, but it is definitely a lot more simplified. One-handed and two-handed weapons are split into their own categories, allowing you to have one of each equipped at a time. The variety of weapons in Ashen is pretty good, with about 40 in total. Each weapon has its own unique appearance and stats, as well as a good mix of different moves. Finding new weapons when you're out exploring is generally exciting, and it's always fun to find a weapon with a unique or weird moveset. My personal favorites were the Gilded Halberd, with its weird mix of twirly moves and thrusting attacks, and of course the Pickaxe, which is slow, clumsy, short range, but packs a ridiculously powerful punch. My only real complaint with the weapons is that the movesets are notably condensed. Every weapon has a light and heavy attack string, a running attack, and various combos, which are performed by alternating between light and heavy attack. The running attacks in particular, though, do seem to be shared across all weapons in each category, which is a bit disappointing. But on the whole, I still had a lot of fun learning how to play effectively with each different weapon that I tried. Offhand equipment in Ashen is much more limited. You get 2 slots to equip either a shield or a lantern. Shields can block and bash, with the bash being particularly useful in a lot of situations, while lanterns, on the other hand, are used while exploring caves and dungeons and are absolutely essential in this game. There are many areas in this game that are in pitch black darkness, and you will absolutely need your lantern to navigate them. It almost reminds me of that old lighting system that never really made it into Dark Souls 2. You will generally use your lantern alongside a one-handed weapon, but a cool feature is that you can drop it on the ground in order to switch off to a shield or another two-handed weapon. This can be super useful at times, but it is tricky to keep enemies near the lantern while fighting in order to not get murdered in the dark. Spears are another type of weapon in Ashen that have their own unique slot. You can use them as melee weapons, but they are primarily used as a very strong ranged attack. I personally didn't use these in my playthrough, partly because they weren't really my style, but also because they're a bit annoying to switch to. Spears show up as a third option in your melee weapons, which makes swapping between one and two-handed weapons take a little bit longer than normal, so I honestly didn't keep them equipped a lot of the time. This is a pretty minor problem, but I felt it was something worth noting. Armor in Ashen is condensed into a single outfit slot. I didn't really mind this as the outfits in Ashen all look very nice, though they are very sparse. There are only 12 outfits in the game, of which I managed to find 10. Armor stats tend to all be the same deal, with reduced stamina and increased damage resistance, so I just wore armor I liked the visuals of and didn't think too much about it. Next we have talismans, which are essentially like runes from Bloodborne. They give various small and sometimes ridiculous bonuses. Like seriously, this thing is the red tearstone ring plus 11. And finally we have consumable items, and I'll just quick fire this for you. Estus Flask, Life Gem, Crescent Moongrass, Green Blossom, Soul of a Lost Undead, Titanite Shard, etc, etc, etc. Straight to the point, the combat in this game is great. It's largely focused on learning enemy attack patterns, spacing, and dodging appropriately. You know, Dark Souls. There's also some form of poise in the game, though I couldn't really tell you exactly how it works. One little random detail I noticed that I thought was pretty cool was that most weapons have a slow attack on the third hit of their light combo, which helps discourage players from just mashing R1 mindlessly. Hey Miyazaki, I hope you're taking notes. My only real complaint is that there's a lot of reused enemy movesets throughout the game. But considering the small size of the game studio, I can't really blame them for that. And at the very least, they tried to add little twists onto each enemy and change their armor and effects around when they do reuse things. So I know you guys are sick of people comparing games to Dark Souls, and I'm aware I've already done it like 15 times in this video, so you'd be happy to know that this is where it stops. While Ashen's core combat is very much like Dark Souls, and it retains a lot of similar systems like bonfires and losing your souls on death, the rest of the game does its own thing entirely. And the first thing to point out here is that Ashen's world is massive. I really enjoyed slowly progressing through each area, trying to find every secret that I could. And slowly is definitely the word to use, because this game's bonfires, which are called runestones, are placed very, very sparse later in the game. There are some places where it feels almost sadistic. Every time I found a runestone, it was like a monumentous occasion. I also can't stress enough how good the aesthetic and presentation of this game is. It manages to transition from soft and relaxing to dark and foreboding without ever feeling out of place. The atmosphere of this game is absolutely wonderful, and it's one of the things that sets Ashen apart. I've never seen a game use light and dark so perfectly for both gameplay and visual purposes. Ashen really engaged me on a level that's hard to describe, and I don't know if words can truly do it justice. It's just something that you have to experience. But enough about that gay shit, I know what you guys really want. Big boys. And good news, the bosses in this game are solid, though there are only a few of them. The difficulty of the boss fights is pretty moderate overall. I only struggled on one boss in particular, but I'm also an epic Dark Souls gamer. Yup. I should probably just end myself. Ashen also allows you to crank the difficulty up if you really want a challenge, by starting a new character with reduced health, or even just turning off the companion and playing purely solo. Some of the late game areas and bosses would be insanely challenging under those circumstances. And of course, I'm already planning to try it on my next playthrough. And that will lead us into the companion and quest system. Ashen's progression is entirely driven by journeys. Each friendly character that you meet has their own story, and when you're progressing through that story, the character joins you as a companion. When you're in multiplayer, that companion is controlled by a real player, but if you're offline, it's controlled by an AI. As you complete chapters of a character's journey, they will move into your town and begin providing services for you. Essentially, as you progress through the game, your town grows and the resources you have at your disposal also grow. It's also important to note that there is no leveling up. Completing journeys gives you small amounts of HP and stamina, which add up over time. There's no way to make builds or grind levels in this game. The focus is entirely on you as a player, instead of on the character you create, which essentially means get good. This is a rather odd point for me. I never actually did any multiplayer during my playthrough, so I don't really know how good it is. The problem for me was that the game's multiplayer does not work unless you run it directly through the Epic Games launcher. And I unfortunately had to launch the game through Steam in order to enable support for my PS4 controller. I did try the multiplayer one time to see how it was, but playing on a mouse and keyboard is a big nope for me. It seemed very well integrated into the game, and the idea behind it is cool, but I haven't played enough of it to know how good it really is. Though what I have played with enough is the AI companion that you get in offline mode. It's not the best. There are times where the AI has done a great job and literally carried my ass through tough moments, but there have also been instances where he has jumped off a cliff and died 2 minutes into a dungeon. It can be a bit frustrating to deal with at times, but it was never a deal breaker for me. Fortunately, the AI companion does respawn after a while, so if he decides to explore the bottom of the ocean right before an important fight, you can at least wait for him to come back. I also wanted to bring up the revival mechanic. If you take lethal damage in Ashen, you get put into a knockdown state, and your companion can revive you. At first, I thought this would make the game super easy, but it's important to note that it can only happen one time. If you get knocked down a second time, you just die. And the same goes for your companion. I also found that revives are definitely not guaranteed. The AI gets confused occasionally and just fails to revive you, or ends up getting himself killed trying. Having an actual player would help make this more consistent, but the limit on only getting one revive would still balance it out just fine. I've already touched on the game's aesthetic and atmosphere a bit, but I really wanted to reinforce this point. Ashen's soundtrack is sublime. The music is very simple and minimal, but it has a lot of impact, and the way it's used in the game is just incredible. When major events or reveals happen, the music reflects that perfectly, and it really accentuates a lot of the game's strong points. One of my favorite ways they use the soundtrack is in Vagrant's Rest. As the town grows, the music slowly changes, and as you walk around, different instruments fade in and out of the song, with each instrument corresponding to a different character and their personality. It's genius. Ashen is a very stable game. In my 22 hours of playtime, the game has never crashed or bugged out on me, though I did notice the game chugs pretty hard when loading new areas. It can be pretty noticeable at times, but it doesn't ever seem to happen during combat, so I don't think it's a big issue. The lack of native PS4 controller support is a problem though. I find it absolutely baffling that they included support for Dvorak keyboards, but not PS4 controllers. I have never in my life met someone who actually uses Dvorak, and I'd bet 95% of you have no clue what the hell I'm talking about. So let's just move on. Ashen is currently only available on the Fortnite launcher. I'm pretty sick of every games company feeling the need to make their own launcher. It's really gotten out of hand, and I hope this game launches on Steam sometime soon. So to wrap things up, if you enjoy Souls, go play this game right now. Ashen is an incredibly unique experience, and I can't possibly recommend it enough. I also find it doubly impressive that this is A44 Studios' very first game, and it was developed with what looks like a very small team of people. I can only imagine what they would do with a bigger budget, and I really am looking forward to their next project. And with that, thanks for watching. If you've already played Ashen, let me know what you thought of it in the comments below, as I haven't really heard much about it from anybody else. And I hope you have a great day, and don't forget to press A to request assisted climb.